today on Mother Mayhem.
If we think about this as a way you learn to protect yourself, our conversation becomes a little bit different because with this lens, you and I aren't going to be asking, how do we silence the voice? We're asking it something far more important. What is this voice afraid will happen if it stopped talking? Welcome back to Mother Mayhem, the podcast for daughters of narcissistic and emotionally limited mothers. I'm your host, Heather Gray, and today I'd like to offer you all a peek behind the curtain of the kinds of conversations we have inside of Mayhem Daughters, our online community. Recently, a daughter posted a question, and I quickly became all Heather about it in my answer. When I realized that my response was heading towards its second page, it occurred to me that this could be and should be a conversation for the show. So I asked the daughter if I could use her question for the show, and I got her permission. The conversation is such a good example of why I love this community so much, because daughters come in thinking they're asking one question, and together we discover that we're actually usually asking something much deeper. And today's daughter, I have named you Dana, after Dana in the old show, The X-Files. Oh my goodness, you guys. I'm really starting to realize that I date myself so much with so many of these pop culture references. But Dana from The X-Files, from much back in the day, she was so driven to know, so driven for proof, and she so desperately needed to understand. And today's daughter, Dana, well, you entered our community with such a deep desire to understand, to connect dots, to connect puzzle pieces. And I get how important it is to you to make sense of yourself to yourself. And I'm really glad that Mayhem's been able to help you with that. I've enjoyed getting to know you in our interactions together, and I'm really grateful for your permission to share this conversation with the larger Mayhem community. So here's your question. I'm going to find you on the other side. I often feel like I'm not listened to, that I could be whispering, talking, yelling, and it just goes into the void. Even in times when the other person is in fact hearing me, it's like I have this internalized voice that repeatedly tells me that my feelings and my thoughts don't matter, that I'm not good enough and never will be, no matter what I do or accomplish. I'm still too fat, quick to anger, have no patience, and at times I just hate myself, even though I know I have great qualities. I'm a caring person and I want to be the best version of myself, even if at times I fall short. I didn't used to feel this way. Ever since things have gone downhill with my mom and my perimenopause symptoms, I don't feel like myself. I used to be a happy person, but I haven't felt happy since before the fallout with my mom. And even before that, I wasn't all that happy because it's been such a rough road with my mom since I had kids. But recently, I'm so mad that she carries on with her life like nothing happened, and I am an absolute shell of myself. I want to not care. I want to not be so sensitive. I want to have a thicker skin. I want to stop thinking about her and dealing with her. I just want to be happy again. There's this version of myself that I want to be, how I feel and interact with the world, and I never seem to be able to get there. I know most of this has to do with my mom, but it's also me. I've internalized that I was never good enough, and my thoughts and my feelings don't matter. It's my mom's voice and actions in my head. How do you change the narrative in your head that's been there so long? She's covert, so she's never outright said I was never good enough, but she's always hinted at it, like, how could I be a stay-at-home mom? It's so boring. Work ethic matters more than anything. Your neighborhood is mostly low-income working class. Don't you think you should move? Don't you think it's time for your son to get a haircut? You only got 100 on the test. Why didn't you get a better score? You got third place in track. Why do you even bother? You're not a runner. You gained weight again. You just have to accept that you'll never be thin. You'll always be fat. Look, I'm thinner than you now. It's these constant covert jabs from her that I had my entire life. My dad was on the complete opposite side of the pendulum. With him, I could accomplish anything I put my mind to. was absolutely beautiful no matter what my weight was, and my thoughts and feelings and mental health mattered more than anything to him. So why can't I have his voice in my head? The one that says I'm more than enough and loves me as I am and believes I'll continue to grow into being the best version of myself. Why am I always so hard on myself? And how can I be kinder to myself? No one makes me feel worse than I do about myself. Whew. All right, Dana. Deep breath. Just a deep breath. You and so many daughters listening. I hear all of the questions you're bringing to us really clearly, and I promise you I'm going to get to them. But first, I think it's important I share with you something that I've been thinking about. You guys have heard me say that I really hate how the narcissistic recovery space is filled with so much jargon. I don't think it's helpful. I find it sensationalizing and clickbaity, and I actually think it gets in the way of healing. And I have to be really honest here, and admittedly, I kind of feel like I'm sticking my neck out a bit on this one. But the more I do this work with you daughters and I have these conversations with all of you, the less inclined I am to separate overt narcissists from covert. Of course, I get why that's been done over time, and we have my own mayhem episodes on this topic, but honestly, what you're basically saying is your mom was mean to you without screaming at you. So there was nothing grandstanding or dramatic in her presentation. She made cuts instead of slashes. All right, I'm going to bite, but you're still cut. You were still not given care for that cut, and you were still made to feel like getting cut was your fault in the first place. And I'm not sure how any of that is particularly covert. Sure, your mom was indirect when saying that she saw your neighborhood as low income, and it's baiting when she asks you if you think your son might need a haircut. Those two, yeah, we can count as criticism she's disguising as some kind of observation. Fine, I'll name it as such. But telling you that you've gained weight again, telling you you're always going to be fat, questioning your already good grades, declaring that she's thinner than you. Dana, none of that was subtle, sister. We can leave the decoder ring on the shelf for a bit. We don't need it. What I think you're really pointing out here is that many daughters end up thinking that abuse only quote unquote counts when someone is screaming, raging, throwing things, or calling them abusive names. It seems to me that what a whole lot of daughters end up saying, thinking, or feeling is if that their mothers weren't downright explosive. They ended up getting categorized as subtle or covert. Criticism doesn't have to be covert to be damaging. A cut is still a cut, and there's still bleeding regardless. I think a trap a lot of daughters find themselves in is that they minimize what happened to them because they're comparing it to something worse or some other imagined version of events. Or, like many daughters have shared with us over time, that they're outright told it could have been so much worse for them. So going forward, I personally am really going to work on language around this issue, because the question isn't about what shade of narcissism your mom's behavior took. The question is, how were you impacted? And Dana, how you were impacted is sitting right here inside your note in your question. We can see how you were impacted, and we see you and we believe you. It wasn't fair and you didn't deserve it. So let's dig in now to your questions. We're sitting with some really big ones here. Why am I so hard on myself? Why can't I just think differently? How do I get my mother's voice out of my head? Here's what I think might help as we walk through this a little bit together. I don't actually think that the problem is the critical voice. I think what we want to break down for you more than the critical voice is actually the relationship you're having with your inner critic. because something I'm noticing in myself and inside other daughters is that the more we fight that damned inner critic voice, the louder she actually ends up becoming. And this is where I kind of do need to bring some psychobabble into the chat. I've enjoyed taking a couple of weeks off from doing that with you guys and just digging right in. But I do think I need to help you understand this a little bit because, Dana, here's the thing. Self-criticism is actually really protective. It's easy to think and to assume that self-criticism is just a different version of self-hatred. After all, the things that the inner critic is telling you are downright awful. But that voice actually is just this leftover survival strategy you had from your childhood. It's there because it's trying to keep you safe. Your inner critic, and this might sound strange if you haven't heard me say it before, I know it's come up on the show a couple of times, but your inner critic is talking to you the way it's talking to you because it thinks it's trying to prevent something. So, for example, some daughters come to think and believe that if they criticize themselves first, no one else will be able to surprise them or catch them off guard. Another daughter might tell themselves a story that if they push themselves hard enough, they're not going to fail. So that voice is what's going to get them to push and avoid failure. And some of you daughters, maybe a little bit more like me, and maybe perhaps, just perhaps, you tell yourselves a story that so long as you never become complacent, you can't be rejected, or if you just stay vigilant, you won't get hurt again. Follow the thread with me here, Dana, because I want you to hear that while the voice you're hearing sounds so incredibly cruel, the intention behind it is your protection. It's trying to take care of you. And if we think about this as a way you learn to protect yourself, our conversation becomes a little bit different. Because with this lens, you and I aren't going to be asking, how do we silence the voice? We're asking it something far more important. What is this voice afraid will happen if it stopped talking? For example, perhaps, Dana, does that inner voice fear becoming lazy? Do you think it's afraid if you don't berate yourself, you'd gain weight, or that you'd be rejected in some way for something? Or maybe, perhaps you're afraid you'll become your mother if you don't pay close attention to who you are actually becoming. Another way of asking these questions with yourself might be to spend some time considering how your inner critic and that voice actually helps you. How has your inner critic had your back or taken care of you or prevented something bad from happening? What does it need to hear from you in order for it to feel safe enough to go off duty? And are you willing to say those things to those parts of you? You're going to be rumbling with this, but as you're rumbling with it, I think it's important that I explain to you, a little bit why simply arguing with that voice isn't going to work. Because let me tell you, a lot of daughters have tried. What you're also wishing you could do here is just replace your father's voice with your mom's voice. And I really get why you do that. We all do. Your mom is the one who's always said you're not enough, while your dad has said you're wonderful. And I'm sure you've spent a fair bit of time trying to convince yourself that your dad was right. But remember, this inner critic is protecting you. And when it comes to your protection, your nervous system honestly could give two shits about something as basic as the facts. Because facts aren't the issue here. Remember what I just said. Fear is the issue. And when we look at it this way, it starts to make a little bit more sense. After all, recently in my own house here, our smoke alarm lost its ever-living goddamn mind in our house. It was insanely overreacting, and I promise you all, I was unable to silence that fucker with my reasoning. I wish I could have. But yes, we have to figure out what your inner critic thinks it's protecting you from. They're not easy questions. You're going to have to sit with them. You're going to have to rumble with them. but really get to know the parts of yourself and build a better relationship with them. And once you have, we need to walk another path together, because I want you to consider something else. And right here, fair warning, is where daughters sometimes get stuck or trip themselves up. Once you've spent some time thinking about these questions, you might encounter a spot where a lot of daughters end up stumbling, because now you understand a bit more where that voice came from, and you can connect it to those childhood moments that were so formative and decisive for you. And you have some knowledge about narcissism under your belts, and more of the dots have gotten connected, especially as you've learned about trauma, everything connected to it. But there is another thread that needs pulling here. And this is where we're going to go next. Dana, all of you daughters listening in, where in your life are you still treating those thoughts as true? If you have a voice that on the regular tells you you don't matter, when you look at your choices, do your choices reflect that belief? If you have that voice telling you that you're lazy or you're selfish or any of those things, or where in your life are you over functioning, if that asshole voice is telling you that you aren't good enough, where in your life might you catch yourself constantly moving your own goalposts? Maybe your voice tells you that nobody cares what you think. What do you do with that voice? Do you stay silent? This is what I need all of you to hear me on. This is why I asked Dana to be vulnerable and share her question with the entire Mayhem community, because I don't think there's a member of this community, and I include myself in this, that doesn't stop and take a beat and ask herself, if this voice is such bullshit, why am I still cooperating with it? Why is she still getting a seat at the goddamn table? Why is she in the driver's seat of decision making? You guys, okay, I'm getting heated. But also, I have to be honest here. I script our conversations. And I just squirmed a little bit writing that. And if you're sitting there squirming too because these questions are hitting a nerve, welcome to the club, sisters. These are the conversations we're having inside of Mayhem all the time. And this is what Thursday nights can end up sounding like when daughters get brave enough to ask themselves the harder questions. This is the conversation in a daughter struggle that cannot happen without some real honesty and personal accountability with ourselves. We have got to be asking ourselves these hard questions. We use the word accountable a lot on this show, especially when we're talking about your moms. But holding accountability really only works if we're willing to hold it with ourselves, because sometimes not every single uncomfortable feeling is connected to our trauma. Sometimes we're uncomfortable because we're not in alignment with who we are, how we're living, or what we're doing. Okay, getting heated again. But sit with that for just a second. Sometimes we are uncomfortable because we are not in alignment with ourselves, with who we want to be, with how we want to move through the world. Because sometimes, you guys, we really are getting uncomfortable because our childhood is getting all kinds of stirred up. But also, sometimes, if we're really freaking honest with ourselves, the other thing, we're getting uncomfortable because we're not living consistently with who we are today. And I really think an important part of healing is learning how we tell the difference. So what do? I think this is where we start with a gut check, or maybe gut check questions, because I have a few of them here. Am I keeping promises to myself? Just ask yourself that for a second. Am I keeping the promises I make to myself? Am I acting in consideration of my values? Or, here's a doozy. What happens when you ask yourself this one? Am I avoiding things that matter to me? Am I speaking up when I need to? Am I taking responsibility for my life? because you can't sit in my office on a group call or in the community or listen to this podcast and just talk yourselves into confidence. We're never going to be able to convince any of you that you are as amazing as you are just by doing that. You build confidence by becoming someone you can trust. Think about that for a second and let those words really land inside your chest. You build confidence by becoming someone you can trust. And what do we need for trust? Well, we need evidence. Dana, I see you trying to solve this thing from your head. And I get it, because that's what a lot of daughters do. We think if we can just find the right insight, the right realization, the right understanding, everything's finally going to click into place. But confidence isn't understanding. Confidence is evidence. Here's what y'all have to know and remember and hold on to when it comes to battling the inner critic and finding that confidence for yourselves. Confidence is always going to be about what you actually do, what your behavior is. You can find confidence when you build reps in speaking up when you're afraid, or setting boundaries when you're uncomfortable, or when you make decisions and increase your tolerance for making mistakes. And also, you find more confidence with each and every promise you keep to yourself. Confidence is evidence that you accumulate over time. It's not a thought or a feeling or even a relationship, even though we know most certainly those things can boost our confidence. And while we're all here together, we have to be really honest with ourselves and with each other, and also name another part of this conversation that is also absolutely real and true. This isn't about never having another self-critical thought again. That is entirely too unrealistic. What I'm trying to work out with all of you guys here is creating a moment with yourself, a promise with yourself, an intentional, conscious decision you make for yourself that clearly states, I am no longer available for a self-critical relationship with myself. I am no longer going to speak to myself in a way that would horrify me if I spoke to a friend. You are no longer going to participate in self-critical conversations. Yes, of course, we all know you're going to notice those thoughts. Just now, when I caught myself repeating myself for emphasis, a voice in my head quickly said, Jesus Christ, Heather, you're not Oprah. Yours aren't the quotes that people share like they're the wisest thing ever. But yet, in a conversation about our inner critic, that is a thought I absolutely had. And I still asked you to stop and listen a second time, even if it risks me sounding presumptuous. This is what I'm trying to get all of you to do. Interrupt the thought, send it somewhere else. I have a few suggestions for where you can send it if you're looking. That voice may not ever disappear, but you can build a new habit, and you can build a new response to it, and you can build a new relationship with it. Dana, I want you and all of the daughters listening to consider something on this. Whether or not you are willing to ask yourselves a different question, because we don't actually want to replace your father's voice with your mother's voice. I would very much prefer you and all of the daughters not to need either voice in your head. You're not going to find healing by answering the question, which parent was right about me? That just hands your power to someone else. What is so much more important is this one. Can you become your own authority on who you are? Will you allow yourself to believe you about that? I don't think the goal is to simply think better thoughts about yourself, although I sure wish and hope that a great byproduct of all of this conversation might be that. But what I really need y'all to hear is I just don't think your mom gets the final say. I don't think your father gets the final say. I think you and your life get the final say. At some point, the evidence of your own life has to matter more than the stories you inherited about yourself. And Dana, I know and respect that this probably isn't where you thought I was going to be taking this particular conversation. I know you thought I was going to give you a whole list of rules and tips and strategies of things you could do differently. But what I really want you to hear is that healing is going to start by asking yourself different questions. I am so glad you're here. I'm so grateful that you allowed me to bring this question of yours to the larger podcast community. It really was something I wanted all daughters to hear. So thank you for being brave and sticking your neck out a little bit and allowing us to do that, because I think what's true for you is true for everyone listening. And I think these are really important questions for this entire community to be sitting with today. All of you are in this incredible community of women from around the world who are standing up tall, hopefully a little bit taller than they were at the beginning of this episode, and holding a little bit more accountability with yourselves and asking yourselves different questions and making commitments to believing yourselves. All of you are in this incredible community of women from around the world. And I, for sure, most definitely, am in it with you too. Bye for now. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you felt seen, understood, and a little less alone in whatever it is you're carrying. The things we talk about here, your mother wound, trauma, identity, and healing, well, they were never meant to be worked through alone. Understanding matters, of course it does, but healing happens inside of relationship. That is one of the biggest things I have learned over the years of having these conversations with all of you daughters. It's also why I created Mayhem Daughters. Mayhem Daughters is my private online community for daughters of narcissistic and emotionally limited mothers. It's where the conversation continues after the episode ends. It's where daughters connect with one another, ask questions, receive support, and practice the work of healing together. Every week, we gather for Thursday Night Mayhem, our live community gathering. And throughout the week, daughters support one another inside a space built specifically for this kind of work. Because there comes a point when another podcast episode isn't actually what you need the most. Sometimes what you need is a place where you don't have to explain yourself so much, where you're understood, and where you can stop doing this work alone. That's what we've built inside of Mayhem Daughters. You can learn more at mayhemdaughters.com/community. If today's conversation resonated with you, please consider sharing it with another daughter who might need it. Your shares and reviews help more women find these conversations. And if you have a story, a question, or a reflection of your own, I'd love to hear from you. You can send me a message at heather@mayhemdaughters.com. And lastly, a heartfelt thank you to Heather Clark. She edits the show and has had my back for nearly a decade. There are very few people who have witnessed as much of Mayhem's evolution as she has, and I'm deeply grateful to have her beside me as I do this. This isn't just a podcast, it's a community. We see you, we believe you, and you already belong. And I'm so very glad you're here.